The
broadcast is live.
Yeah, we are going live. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to most of y'all. It's almost good afternoon. But we are lucky enough to have Mr. Terry Cadenbach with us again today for his part 2 sit down. We had, as many of you saw, we had some technical issues yesterday. We've ironed them out. We think pretty spot on. So we're gonna go ahead and get things started. This one will go probably an hour or a little bit longer, depending on our time frame. But here's Mr. Terry to start things off for us today. Mr. Terry.
Good morning, everybody. We're gonna take up where we left off yesterday. One thing, you know, when you get old, things don't always work right. I was telling the story about when I got shot the first time and went to the hospital in Japan, and my best friend showed up at the hospital, and we went out doing the town while I was in the hospital. What I forgot was I asked him, well, how did you know that I'm in this hospital? All I knew was that he was in communications, and that's all I knew. So once we got out of the hospital where nobody could hear, he says, we both got top secret clearances, so I think I can tell you. I'm in a top secret communications unit, and we relay messages from the headquarters in Saigon back to the White House every day. And he said, I saw the message come across that you had been shot and that you were in this hospital. So that's how I knew you were there. Just another one of them funny things that, you know, it makes for good stories. And even to this day, we still laugh about that because he had gone to Vietnam while I was in training group. And then we were both home on leave at the same time. And all I knew was he was going to Japan and I was going to Nam. And then we made plans for my R&R in Tokyo, which didn't happen, but we had a better R&R anyway. So anyway, continuing where we left off yesterday, I left off in September. I can't remember. Let's see. September, I got my third gunshot wound in the side. Not very memorable, but then we get into October. So we had an option. Everybody over there had the option. At the end of your 13-month tour, if you wanted to come back for another in 6-month increments, you could extend. So I had filled out, and I can't say every guy in SOG did it, but I can say that the majority of us extended, some even multiple times. And so I had put in for an extension. So I got my orders for extension leave. So you got a 30-day leave at the government's expense anywhere in the world that you wanted to go. Wow. Well, I just wanted to go home. You know, I wanted to go home. So October 29th, and I was supposed to leave, I think October 31st or something to come home. October 29th, my company had a mission, and this goes back to the whole deal about there being moles in Saigon and in SOG headquarters. We didn't talk about it earlier, but it seemed like every time we'd put a team in, they were waiting on us. Well, you can figure it out. It didn't take a genius to figure out that there had to be a mole that was providing the coordinates of our LZs, how many men were coming in, and all that good stuff. So our company had a mission, and supposedly this North Vietnamese defector had provided information about a POW camp that held some of our guys and a lot of our pilots and what have you. So they're going to send the company in and wreak havoc on them and try to rescue a bunch of prisoners. It didn't happen. The company went in. And as soon as they got on the ground, I forget how many helicopters we lost that day. I was back at camp on the radio because I was getting ready to leave to come home, or I would have been on that mission. Our captain, the company commander, Captain Whalen, was immediately struck in the head by an RPG. And Ron Bozikas, one of our squad leaders, took a burst from an AK or a machine gun, we don't know which, and he was killed instantly. They spent the rest of the day, this area where they were put into, it turned out, was completely surrounded by concrete bunkers. So the whole thing was a setup. And the North Vietnamese, their big thing was taking down helicopters. It seemed like they wanted to take helicopters down more than they cared about killing Americans. Anyway, the company fought for their life that whole day and that whole night. I was on the radio, in the radio room, I'll say, all night long. And early in the morning, a message came across, and it just said, the special ordinance is on its way from Hawaii. It'll be there. Be ready. Have everybody ready at first light. So the company was told, everybody, we always carried gas masks because you never know what's going to happen. So everybody had their gas masks on, whatever that C-130 was carrying, and I'm not going to discuss it because I have a feeling I know what it is, and it's very controversial. All I can say is the choppers got in and got everybody out without a shot being fired. Enough said.
Absolutely.
So, yes, the NVA did use gas on us, but I think we used it on them a whole lot more.
Oh, absolutely.
But that's why we carried gas masks, because you just never know.
I just wanted to show.
So anyway, I left Kontum, took my flight back to the States, went home. My mom picked me up at the airport, and she said, do you know a Ron Bozikas? And I said, yeah, he was killed the other day on a mission that I would have been on if I was not coming home. She said, well, his funeral is this afternoon. So I'm still in uniform. So my cousin is there at the house with his brand new Corvette convertible. And he said, hop in and I'll take you to the funeral. So I went to the funeral and I met the family. And after the funeral, they invited me back to the house to visit with the family. I'm not going to say it was a mistake, but in a minute you'll understand why I kind of wish I didn't. We got to the family's house, and Bozikas had been a real well-known high school football player. Mm-hmm. And I'm friends on Facebook with his sister and whatever. But the father, well, it turned out that Bozikas broke all the rules in the book. He was writing letters home, giving full details about what we were doing, where we were doing it, and all that. And so his dad starts asking me all these questions. And his whole thing was, all the medals and all the stuff says in an enemy-controlled area of Southeast Asia or South Vietnam. It varied from one to the other. All he wanted was to have proof that his son was killed in Laos, and he wanted the government to acknowledge that his son was killed in Laos. No, Bozikas was not with Wayne and Oscar 8. Wayne was killed about a month after Bozikas. Fast forward 2 years. When I got out of the Army, I was a cop, And I get contacted by a reporter from the St. Louis newspaper, and she's got all this information about SOG. And it's like, that stuff's so classified. Where'd you get your information? Well, I interviewed some helicopter pilots, and I interviewed a special forces captain who was in SOG. And it just so happened that I knew the captain. And he lived in the St. Louis area. And I'm like, why can't these guys keep their mouths shut? Because we're still running missions. Well, it was 72, so we were basically at the end of the thing. Anyway, her father, Bozikas's father, kept bugging this reporter to do these stories. And this went on for about a year. And every time I'd turn around, she's calling again, got more information. I want you to verify the information. Is it correct or not? Well, of course it was all correct because she's getting it from people that were actually involved. And finally, things died down because I just wouldn't tell her anything. So anyway, going back, I go home on leave, go to Bozikas's funeral. When we left the family's house, my cousin takes me by this Chevy dealer, and they got this brand new metallic gold Corvette sitting on the parking lot. Okay, fine. So then I go to the dealer that's out closer to where I live, and I told, okay, I saw this vet. What's it going to take to get it? And he says, now, keep in mind, this is November 1969, brand new Corvette, factory side exhaust, convertible, a 1-year special edition engine. It was a 350 cube, 350 horse, a screaming machine. $4,650 off the lot.
Ooh.
Yeah, exactly. $4,650. So it's like, well, get it here. I'll come sign the papers and take it home. So I ended up with a brand new Corvette convertible that I spent driving around for 30 days. My cousin and I would take our Corvettes and we'd go park on parking lots. We got a chain of restaurants here in St. Louis called Steak and Shake. We'd just go park. We'd go get our beer and in a cooler and sit there on the parking lot with the tops down and the stereo going and wait for the girls. So it was a very entertaining 30 days. Anyway, so it's time to go back. So I was supposed to be back. Well, I had to go to Fort Lewis, Washington, and then fly to Saigon, and then fly back to Nha Trang, process in, go back to Kontum. Well, this is where my buddy Wayne Anderson comes in. Wayne and I were roommates, and he, it was my platoon going into Oscar 8. Well, I wasn't back yet. We got delayed in Seattle, a flight delay, and then another delay when I got back to Saigon. So I was not back in time to go on the mission. So they were one man short. And because it was Oscar 8, you knew you were going to get your ass kicked really bad and handed to you on a plate. And nobody would volunteer to take my place on this mission except for Wayne. And he stood up and said, hell, I'll go. So he went. The terrain in Oscar 8 was like a big bowl, but it was still very heavily defended. In fact, it was so heavily defended that when they went in, I've heard different stories about the number of troops, but it seems like they went in against a regiment or possibly even a division, because that was far enough north. It was one of the main infiltration routes into South Vietnam. And so naturally, you had a higher concentration of troops. Wayne was killed. There's some discrepancies about how he was killed. The bullet went in his hip and came out his neck. You'll have to draw your own conclusions. I know what I think happened and whatever, but it is what it is. So Wayne was killed. I got back to camp 2 days later, I guess, and they had already cleaned out his personal belongings and everything. And another good friend lost. To this day, on December 3rd, myself and Wayne's one of his closest civilian friends, we still tip a drink to him. That's one that probably hit me harder than any of the others that we lost over the year. It's one of those things. So we go through December. The second half of December, they were starting to have us help CCN out. So we were starting to do some missions further north than what we normally would do. Oscar 8 was one of those. So that kind of started it. Well, we set up a temporary launch site down on the runway at the Doc Peck Special Forces Camp. Doc Peck was the 7 mountains. So it's in this hole completely surrounded by 7 mountains. And we're set up in a GP tent down there on the chopper pad. And Bud says that all my pictures are available online. Well, if you look in some of my pictures, I don't know how he's got it set up, but the way I sent it to him, there's a directory called Doc Peck. And so we sleep in this GP tent and we're eating sea rations. Well, Christmas Day, 1969, all of a sudden we hear this chopper coming around and circling. And as it gets closer, we see Santa Claus sitting in the door gunner's seat, and it circles around and the chopper lands, and there's
Terry and
Santa Claus. He's got a mop, a long string mop for a beard, but he's got a Santa suit and everything. It was just crazy. So we took a bunch of pictures, and their real purpose for coming there was not for me to see Santa Claus, but they were bringing some Red Cross donut dollies to go up to the A camp. Now, them guys at the A camp thought we were all wacko dudes anyway. So we did not get invited up to the A camp to visit with the donut dollies. God. But nevertheless, it made for a good story. So we were running operations out of Doc Peck, going much further north. And, a lot of it had to do with distance for the choppers to have enough fuel to get us to wherever we were going to go and be able to spend some time on station, because if we got hit as soon as we landed, it's going to take some time to get us back out. So the choppers needed to have fuel, and that was a reason for all the different launch sites that we had. It was all the same thing. It was fuel driven. So anyway, go to the end of December. I go back to the FOB. In January, we got another one of these SLAM missions. And this was Bud's pointing, but I'm not sure what he's trying to tell me. But again, like yesterday, I said, search, locate, annihilate, and mutilate. And this time, what was going to happen was both companies were going to go in, and there were these flat hilltops on either side of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And they'd been bombed so much, you had a clear view of the road. So what happened is, I never heard the terms Havoc or Hornet Force. I've heard the terms used, but all I know is Hatchet Force. I know Havoc or Hornet was like one platoon or whatever. We never use those terms to my knowledge. It's either a platoon goes in or the whole company. So A company went in on one hilltop on one side of the road. B company went in on the hilltop on the other side of the road. And there's pictures out there somewhere. They're not my pictures, but they're aerial pictures. And one of the A1 pilots, Don Ingebretson, when I met him out at SOAR a couple of years ago, he was trying to put together a complete, I don't know, timeline or whatever of that mission. And so the whole idea was to restrict traffic on the trail, and then the aircraft would come in and blow the hell out of these convoys that were backing up for miles on the trail. And that's what happened. They just couldn't get through. And one day a chopper, well, it was actually when we were being put in on our hilltop on Company B. A couple of guys get off the chopper, and I recognized one of them as Glenn Yamura, who I went through training group with. And Glenn was on a recon team with Frank Miller, and they landed with us. And then in all the commotion of all the choppers coming in, they walked down off the hill, and they walked into what was estimated as a company of NVA. And Frank did his thing and was later awarded the Medal of Honor for it. Just like everything else we did, they got shot all to hell. And last night, somebody got a hold of me and asked me a question about this. That, well, when you went in a company-sized strength, wasn't that pretty safe and secure? And it's like, hell no, because if you think about it, they know we're coming. They know where we're landing. They know how many of us are, so they know there's a company coming. And in late 68, early 69, the NVA had developed these, whatever you want to call them, hunter-killer teams, counter recon teams, and their entire mission was to try to take us out. So, every time we go in, a recon team, they might only have a squad or a platoon going after them, but a hatchet force, so they know there's a company coming in. They kind of know our tactics. So we might be going in against, a platoon, a company, even a division, and we never know what we were going in against until it happened. And the big difference between the recon teams and the hatchet force teams was supposedly our job was reconnaissance and force, but actually our job was to exploit things that the recon teams had found, whether it's a truck park or, like when I got shot the first time, it was a truck park, refueling stop. See, again, it brings up other memories that I left out when I told that story. That truck refueling station, and Vernon Ward, I don't know if he's got the pictures today or not, but he reminded me there was a huge pile, or they were neatly stacked, of 55-gallon drums, red and yellow, Shell Oil Company. Thank you very much, Shell Oil Company, for helping the bad guys.
Absolutely.
Well, what I think probably happened was some third party was buying all this diesel fuel from Shell. They were getting it shipped to Sihanoukville in Cambodia, and then it was being shipped up the trail, and they were filling these. Now, further north, Operation Tailwind, if anybody's familiar with that, which happened after I came home, again, my company, there was actually fuel lines running on the ground, and they were pumping fuel from up north down. So that's how sophisticated this trail was, you know. Anyway, the roadblock, and this was not the first time that we had done that, got credited it got credited with thousands and thousands of kills and vehicles blown up.
Absolutely.
So when I got back to camp, they sent me back to put together a resupply load. So I got that put back, and the colonel that we had at the time, the camp commander, I guess Lieutenant Colonel, he says, your extension, because I extended again, and he said, your extension was not approved. He didn't tell me at the time, but of course later you learn we were beginning the cutback, and we're reducing the number of our men. So my next extension didn't get approved. So he said, we're just going to keep you here at camp. And, you know, you've been through enough. And so that ended up being my last mission, much to my detriment. I was not a happy camper. And, you know, but it is what it is. So they had me running the yard club for a couple of months. And not what I wanted to be doing. I'm not a bar manager, you know. One day I took a 1.5 and a 3/4 ton truck and went down to Pt2, which was like 23 kilometers south of us. And we were notorious for scrounging. The Army did not provide food for special forces. They gave us $77.10 a month, what they called rations non-available, and we were supposed to procure our own food on the local economy. Well, I got to tell you, we were eating steak 3 or 4 nights a week. How was that happening? Because we were going places and either trading or whatever. So we go down to Pt2, and we go to this mess hall. And it couldn't have worked out any better. The mess sergeant had been my mess sergeant back in the States. So it was like old home week. And he proceeds to tell me, he says, I got all this food that I want to get rid of because they make me draw rations for the number of people who are assigned to my mess hall. He said half them guys are officers and they eat at the officers club because they can have steak and lobster or whatever. So he says, I got all this extra food and I want to get rid of it. We filled up a 1.5 and a 3/4 ton truck with stuff, including, you know, the big cardboard canisters of ice cream that you see at Baskin Robbins.
Yes, sir.
We had canisters in trash bags packed with ice. We had fresh fruit. We had steak. We had all kinds of stuff. And that became a regular thing. And I said, well, what do you want to trade for it? And he says, I want to redecorate my mess hall. So I want some weapons. I want some Montagnard, like crossbows and stuff. NVA stuff would be really cool. So we go back. I had the yards make some crossbows. We had Mama San down at the tailor shop make up some NVA flags.
Yes.
And we put the flags out on the range and we put bullet holes in them and scorch marks and all that stuff. So it looked like we captured them in battle, and we traded. Sometimes we'd go up to Da Nang on the C-130, the Blackbird, and you go to the Navy people and trade whatever you want, plywood, floor tile. That's probably where my SKS went that I got shot with. But we trade for all kinds of good stuff. And that's how we survived.
Yeah.
And yeah, we ate good. I'm telling you, 3 or 4 steak 3 or 4 nights a week. I don't eat like that back here at home. I only have steak maybe once a week. But
eat better than most of us eating today. Y'all are eating good.
Exactly. Ain't no hamburgers, but it's steak. Anyway, so that was my last mission. So, you know, and again, this is where I keep forgetting stuff because I'm talking too fast. I had a Super 8mm movie camera, and I took a bunch of movies and stuff while I was there. And one of the things that I filmed was the mission that Bozikas went on, that he was killed on. I filmed the choppers taking off. And the last shot that I filmed was the shot of the chopper Bozikas was in, with him right there in the doorway. And it haunts me to this day. I mean, I still have the video, but Walmart screwed it up when I had it converted to DVD, and they did it too fast. And so it's real flickery. But I got some software. I'm going to try to slow it down if I can. And they didn't give me back the original movie film. But anyway, a friend of mine was asking me the other day about, it seems like there's a lot of alcoholism in the military and all that. And so he asked me about that, and he said, how did you guys deal with losing your team members and everything? And the best answer I can give him is alcohol. When I came home the final time in April of 70, the 30 days I was home before I reported into Fort Bragg, I was drinking 2 cases of beer a day.
Oh my God.
2 cases of beer a day.
Jeez.
And I got down to Bragg and I went cold turkey.
Oh.
And it like to killed me.
Yes, sir.
But for a lot of us, that was our way of coping with losing our friends and teammates. And you know, it's what you do to get through. And then when I got down to Bragg, you know, I processed in, and then they looked at my records and realized that sooner or later my ankle was going to prevent me from doing what I needed to do. And they put me to work in the company, so they didn't put me on a team or anything. I was in 7th Group, and at the time, 7th Group was responsible for South America. And there was stuff going on down there. So I reported into Bragg on May the 19th, and I married a local gal on June the 3rd or July 3rd. I had known her before I went to Vietnam. Big mistake, but that came years later. And then one day they, about 2 weeks after I got married, they said, there's a special project coming up, and we're looking for volunteers. And if you got combat experience, pretty guarantee you're going to be on a team. So I go and got interviewed by Bull Simons, and they wouldn't tell us exactly what the operation is. It's just that we'd be gone for a couple of months and we could expect some heavy combat. Okay, fine. You know, I've been to SOG, so what do you want to do? So I volunteered, and they said, well, we're not going to take you because you just got married and we don't feel like your mind is going to be on the mission. So needless to say, that mission was the prisoner raid at Sante prison camp. And that's one of my big regrets all these years, was I didn't get to go on that mission, even though it ended up being a dry hole. They got to shoot a bunch of bad guys. And you know, it is what it is. It's the way things work out in the military. But so then they kept sending me to the doctors with my ankle, and the doctors would send me to physical therapy, which it doesn't take a genius to figure out. Shattered ankle means shattered bones and ligaments hanging and all that. Physical therapy ain't going to fix that. I don't care what you say. So finally, on the fourth try, I get a doctor who had been a combat surgeon in Vietnam. And he's like, why do they keep sending you to physical therapy? He says, we need to operate and fix it. So October 16th, which was, I think it was a Monday, I had surgery to rebuild my ankle. Well, that was on Monday or Tuesday. So then they put me in a full cast and they send me home, which home was my ex-father-in-law drove an hour up from southeastern North Carolina to pick me up. Went back home. Friday evening, my fever was 106.
Oh.
So he brings me back to the hospital. They give me a shot of Demerol. They cut a window in my ankle in the cast and literally took a Q-tip and started scraping the infection out.
Oh.
And they did it before the Demerol kicked in.
Oh.
So they give me a pillow to bite down on, and I bit through the pillow, and there's feathers going everywhere.
God.
Anyway, long story short, they couldn't kill the infection. And on Monday, they said, tomorrow morning at 7:30, we're going to come get you and take you into surgery, and we're going to have to take your leg off at the knee. I said, no, that ain't going to happen. So I made a phone call. And about an hour later, there's a general and a colonel and all their little entourage shows up, find out what the hell's going on. And I guess the doctors convinced them it was the only way. It's either that or I was going to die from the infection. So I didn't get much sleep that night. And literally 7 o'clock the next morning, the fever broke. So I didn't lose my ankle or my leg, but I spent 3.5 months in the hospital. And one day they came to me and they said, you're never going to be fit for duty for special forces, so start processing out. And literally 2 days later, I was out of the Army. God. That's, just like that. And I was planning on making a career of it, and I'm out of the Army. So I spent, into January, February, March. I spent 2 months lifting weights every day and getting my body back in shape from laying in a hospital bed for 3.5 months. And then I got a job as a cop, and I did that for a few years. And then I ended up with a career with the telephone company. And then for the past 30 some years, I've been real active in Civil War reenacting and had horses and, Civil War cavalry. And I teach leatherworking to disabled vets. I was teaching down at Fort Leonard Wood, which is about a half hour from the house. In 2012, I started teaching. The commanding general asked if I would teach a leatherworking class to the guys who had been wounded and were in the process of transitioning out of the Army. So I did that every week. And in 2014, I was awarded the President's Silver Medal. Of course, President didn't give it to me. And so I got a little medal, which you probably can't see it, but this little, where's it at? This little round medal right there, that's the President's Silver Medal. Wow. So I got that, and I got a letter from the president hanging on the wall in my workshop. So I've been teaching leather work. They shut down the WTU in 2015. So I did that for 3 years, and I still do it. I've got 3 students right now that are all disabled vets. And that, I'm a saddle maker, leather worker, and all that stuff. So we make a lot of holsters and saddles and whatever. And I guess that's my passion, and that's why I don't have PTSD. Because I go to town for breakfast in the morning, and I come home, change clothes, go to the workshop, and I spend all day out there doing leather work. And I guess that's how I keep my sanity. I think I've talked so much that it may be getting to the point of being boring. I'd like to see some questions come in that we could answer. Don't you, Bud?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Let me go through some and just because he's mentioned in the new book, and not a lot of people know about this gentleman, but he was actually the man who wrote up the citation, because he was a English major, but went on to get his doctorate, and was the headmaster at VMI. But he wrote Bob Howard up for the event, the citation that eventually got his Medal of Honor, Mr. Alan Farrell. While I'm picking up a question, would you like to speak on Mr. Alan Farrell a bit? The kind of cool man he was, and the
Alan Farrell was, to all appearances, was not what I would call your typical Special Forces SOG guy. He was a school teacher and laid back. He was real laid back. He was married. I think he was about 23 at the time. One of the last people in the world that I would ever expect to stay in the Army and become a command sergeant major. But he did. And when the yard camp got attacked in March of '69, Alan and Michael Seibel, they were sent out with a patrol to try to figure out what was going on around us. And they ended up getting trapped in a deserted building and that for a while, and we had to send a team out to try to recover them, which we did. Video camera I was talking about, I have a video of my grandmother sent me a blow-up swimming pool, little, like little kids use. And I've got some video of Alan Farrell, Wayne Anderson, and myself playing in that swimming pool in our underwear. Yeah, just another, you got to do something sometimes to break up. Okay, I got a question here. How did you feel about going into the bush with indig troops in the beginning? Did you have any reservations about them? How long did it take for you to trust them? When I first got there, I knew nothing about the Montagnards or anything else. And what I was quickly educated on was the Vietnamese hated the Montagnards. They considered them to be a bunch of savages, kind of like our American Indians. And so there was a lot of going back and forth between the two. We paid the average indigenous soldier that worked for us was paid more than a Vietnamese army officer in a month. And I got to tell you, we loved the yards. Yeah, there were a few bad ones, but overall, we loved them to death. And once you got established as a bona fide badass in combat, and it just worked out that way, but I did that on my first mission when I took that M79 and killed all the bad guys. The yards then, I never once had a concern about watching my back because I knew they had it. And I loved them so much that in the evenings, if we weren't out on a mission, I was teaching them English and they were teaching me their different dialects. And I still have all the handwritten notes of the words and what they were in the different dialects and that, like Rade, Hmong, Brew. Okay, next. So anyway, bottom line is we love the yards. Our government did them dirty when we pulled out of Vietnam. I talked about that yesterday. Thankfully, some of them escaped, and there's a couple of communities here in the United States of them now. I would love to meet back up with some of my yards. Okay, next question is, can I describe the feeling of infilling into the bush for the first time? Were you utterly terrified, or were you mentally prepared? How well did your training prepare you for what you encountered? Multiple part question. And did that feeling ever go away? Anybody that tells you that they weren't afraid is lying through their teeth. And I would question, did they ever really go to the bush? To me, the biggest, because, you know, when we weren't out in the field, we were constantly, every day, train for the eventualities, you know, like immediate action drills. In my videos, I've got videos of us doing the IADs back on our range and that, so that we could be prepared for any situation that came up. We did a lot of training with different weapons. But we trained. To me, the most stressful part was we get told, okay, you got a mission. This is what it's going to be. You do the briefing and all that. And it's that time from then until the choppers pick you up at Dak To and say, we're going in. To me, that was the most stressful time, because it's one of those things, hurry up and wait. And it's the stress of, okay, could this happen? Could that happen? And I'm going to tell a story in a minute if I don't forget of the stress. So to me, the most stressful part was the lead up to going in. When you go in, you got a job. You got a job to do. You get off the chopper, you get off the LZ into the clearing, into the tree line as quick as possible. Everybody forms up. You let the covey know either we're good or we're in combat. And then depending on that, depends on what happens next. To me, that feeling never did went away. It never did go away. It was always the same. The anticipation could kill you. The actual doing the job, we were so well trained to do it that it just came naturally. You do what you got to do. And to give you an example of puckered up, one time we were going in, and when we would leave Dak To, we would fly past the Special Forces, the A-Team camp at Ben Het, which was sat right on the border. And we'd see the blown up Russian tanks and the wire and all that stuff. So this one mission, you're sitting there, you got your AR, your M16, or later on the Car 15, your feet hanging over the edge, and you could shoot if you had to. So this one time, once we got past Ben Het, a Russian MiG-19 flies up alongside of us, and he throttles it down, and he goes parallel. And I'm thinking, God, that guy's going so slow, he's going to drop out of the sky. And he stayed, it seemed like minutes, but it was probably more like 20 seconds or something. And I'm thinking, well, why aren't the gunships shooting him down? Because they're behind him. Why don't they shoot him down? And all of a sudden, he kicked it in and took off. And then another time on a mission, it was about midnight one night, and we hear a chopper landing. Well, we know damn good and well it ain't one of ours, and you can tell by the sound. There ain't nothing that sounds like a Huey. And we could tell it wasn't one of our choppers. So I called Leghorn and I reported it. And then they said, I'll get back to you. You know, they come back to us and said, disregard, you did not hear anything. Okay. So the first thing that came to mind was a CIA operation. No, not hardly. And I've since, just recently actually, and I saw some pictures, one of a recon team that sneaked up on a bivouac area, and there was a chopper sitting there parked in the trees. So there were, in fact, Russian helicopters, and there was a number of different, um, you know, different instances of Russian choppers. Nobody wanted to talk about it at the time. So about 4 or 5 years ago, when I was out in Vegas at SOAR, the 20th Special Operations Squadron, the chopper pilots that flew for us, they were having their reunion at the same time in the same hotel. And I saw a sign saying their hospitality room was in room whatever. So I went up there, and of course, they're all drunk, you know. But we get to talking, and it turned out that one of the guys that I was talking to, I asked that question about Russian MiGs and all that. This guy was the pilot of the chopper that I was on when that happened. And he said, oh, that happens all the time. I said, well, why didn't somebody shoot him down? And he's like, well, you know, when he got ready to kick in the afterburner and take off, he saluted us. And all he was doing was showing a sign of respect. So we didn't shoot him down. Plus, if we shot him down, there'd be hell to pay because that would have caused an international incident, you know. But the bottom line is those MiGs never did shoot one of our planes down that we're aware of. So it was just a weird thing, you know. Here's a MiG flying alongside of us, and it was the only time it ever happened to me, and I'm happy with that, you know. So there's a lot of these little stories like that are just real short, brief little stories, but it's like hard to believe. Question got asked about weapons of choice. You know, when I first get there, Bob Howard, he gives me an M16 and a 1911, a 45 pistol. Well, one of our guys that I had gone through training group and went over there with, everybody goes to town and buys some kind of a holster for the 1911. Some of us bought Western style, Hollywood Western style holsters. I bought that. This guy bought a shoulder holster. And he was practicing quick draw with a 1911 cocked and locked. And if you're familiar with a 1911, yeah, that's not the thing to be playing quick draw with. Well, he went to pull it and he squeezed a little too hard. The bullet went in at his hip and came out above his knee. So he lost his leg. And I was terrified of 1911s after that. And robocall. And so basically, I had a 1911, which I was afraid of, and I had an M16. Well, then I started hearing about the Swedish K submachine guns. So I went down to Supply and I talked to Bob Howard and he said, well, you know, some of the recon guys like to use them because they're small and all that. And he said, I'll give you one, give you a bunch of mags. And if you want to try it out, see if you like it. I carried it one time, never carried it again. It was those 30 round mags of 9mm. It was just too heavy. Later on, I got my hands on a grease gun, an M3 grease gun. Same thing. I took it out. I thought this would be great on ambushes because I can put that 45 could put a bullet through the hood of a truck and take out the engine. Same thing. Too heavy. Not practical. After I got shot the first time, I got my hands on a little Browning 25 automatic, and in the cargo pockets on the legs of your trousers, inside the left leg, there's a little bitty pocket, and it was just the right size to put that 25 auto in, and that was my last stand thing, because I ain't going to Hanoi. I ain't going to be a prisoner. And a lot of the guys did that. Well, then I acquired a Smith & Wesson military and police Model 10, which was a police gun for many years. It was a 38 with a 4-inch barrel. So I carried that right dead in the front of my belt in a holster. And that way I wouldn't run into that situation again of not having a backup weapon. When I came back from the hospital, which would have been the end of April '69, they had taken our M16s and issued us CAR 15s. I loved the CAR 15 because it was shorter, more easily maneuverable in the woods, and I guess they resolved the ammunition problem. Never had a single jam up with CAR 15. And today I've got 3 ARs, and they're all short barreled, just almost like the CAR 15. So I feel very comfortable with them. Let's see, what other kind of weapons? Some of the recon teams, some of the recon teams carried Russian weapons. They dressed like NVA, and if that saved them 5 seconds, if they ran into some NVA, it could mean between life and death. With the Hatchet Force, there was enough of us that none of us did that. Pretty much we all carried ARs or
CAR 15 or your.
Then the yards carried. When I first got there, the yards were carrying BARs.
Oh, wow.
Then it became, they got M60 machine guns. They had M16s and they had M79s. So it was a good mix of pretty much all the standard weapons. A question popped up a second ago and now it went away. There you go. Crazy experiences with improvised explosives. Yes. Too much det cord to try to blow a tree, for example. Well, it's a little worse than that. I had this philosophy that, okay, we're on an ambush down on the trail and it's 10 o'clock at night and the convoy's starting to come down the road and we want to take a prisoner. That was, if we could, let's get a prisoner. Well, to get the prisoner, you got to disable the truck. And I wasn't a demo guy. I was a weapons guy. So anything I knew about demolitions, I was learning on the fly. So my idea to stop an NVA truck was to take an empty soda can, or I carried a lot of canned fruit with me out in the field because that extra sugar would help, energize you. So I would take a can and I'd pack it full of C4, and then I'd put one of our little M26 toe popper mines on top of the C4, dig a hole in the road, plant the C4. My theory was that when the truck drove over it, it would blow the wheel off the truck and disable the truck, and we run out and snatch the prisoner. The problem was that I was using way too much C4, and instead of blowing the wheel off the truck, I was blowing up the truck and killing the driver. So it didn't take too many times of that before they quit letting me plant my little improvised munition. So then other guys did other things. That was my big thing. I mean, we used det cord and C4 to blow trees to clear an LZ sometimes. But we had guys that were more experienced with it than me. I mean, I got to do it, and I had a lot of fun blowing stuff up. And to this day, I still love blowing shit up. You know, it's fun. In fact, I'm clearing. I got 60 acres down here in the country, and I'm clearing one of my fence lines. And there's a bunch of trees we had to cut down, and there's stumps. I want them stumps out of there, and there's one in particular that's driving me crazy. So I think I'm going to go buy a 1 pound thing of that stuff called tannerite, put it in there, and get back and shoot it with one of my ARs and blow that sucker to pieces. I can't wait. I'm ready to do it because it's driving me crazy.
I'm sure if anybody can.
We use a lot of. Every one of us would carry 1 or 2 blocks of C4 because you never know what you're going to need to use it for. Whether it's blowing trees, maybe you find an ammo cache and you want to blow it up. You never know. So every one of us, the Americans, we all carried det cord and C4, as well as other goodies, you know, claymores, toe poppers, all that kind of stuff. When am I going to write a book? I ain't. Ain't going to happen. I don't want to be critical of anybody, but I have no interest in writing a book. All these recon guys have written all the books and, you know, told you how great recon was, and you don't hear anything about Hatchet Force. So maybe that would be an argument why I should write a book. But I don't consider the stuff that I did as, you know, my mind after 50 some years, you know, I forgot a lot of details. On the recon teams, they all had their little book where they'd write all their mission notes, the AO, the coordinates, all that kind of stuff. In the Hatchet Force, we didn't do that. So anything I would have, any story I could tell would be strictly based on memory, but not anything written that I could rely on for accurate notes. And, you know, after 50 some years, the memory starts getting bad. What was your favorite form of air support in a sticky situation, meaning which bird or chopper gave you all the best chance of breaking contact? Again, keep in mind that the experiences in recon were totally different than Hatchet Force. In Hatchet Force, there was no such thing as Ian. If you got in deep doo-doo and you're surrounded and all that, you're coming out where you're at. You're not going to try to E&E and all that stuff. Personally, and I think for a lot of the guys, our favorite form of air support was the A1s. Those old propeller-driven Korean War planes. And the big reason they were so popular, there were a few times when we used fast movers. Now, the fast movers, to get to us, they were coming from Da Nang, which was probably 300 miles away. If a fast mover is going to help you out, they just barely had time to get to you, drop their stuff, and go. An A1 generally had about 4 hours on station. So they could hang around. Maybe you're getting ready to set off. Maybe you're getting ready to ambush or hit a regimental base camp, just as an example. So you got all your aircraft lined up, and you may have 6 or 8 or 10 A1s flying around out there out of earshot, so they couldn't hear them. You may have your gunships, whatever. Cobras are another one. They're pretty badass. But the A1s was my very favorite because of that. If you get in trouble, they got 4 hours to fly around and help you out. And they carried high explosive rounds. They carried white phosphorus rounds. They carried napalm in different configurations. The planes were all different depending on the missions that they were assigned that day. And we all carried a strobe light, okay? And most of us carried it on our harness right up here at our shoulder. And the strobe light was in this nylon case that snapped shut on the top. So at night, you could unsnap that thing and the nylon of the case would guide the beam strobe straight up instead of lighting up the whole jungle around you.
Oh.
And I do have to brag on myself. I got so good at working the airstrikes. I've got a piece of shrapnel in a frame out in my workshop that I dug out of the ground next to my thigh because I worked it in that close, because we were in really deep stuff. And thank the strobe lights. Spooky gunships was another one that's, to me, is underrated. Those spooky gunships, Puff the Magic Dragon, all those aerial gunships. I had some pictures that I took from Leghorn. Looking towards what was called the Bra, which was the river, looked like a bra, and a spooky gunship working, and all you could see was about 1 million little dots or dashes of red going down to the ground. That's how bad. Well, 6,000 rounds a minute. You know. And again, I guess another story. You know, when we dig in at night, it didn't take you an hour to dig in. You dig a hole. Normally, it wasn't a full hole that you'd stand in. It was just usually like big enough to lay in, just to give you a little bit of protection. So it varied. Sometimes they'd hit you at night. 6 o'clock in the morning, you can be guaranteed that the mortar rounds are going to start coming in every morning like clockwork at 6 o'clock. So one of these missions, you know, we're surrounded, and I happen to have a captain who was the platoon leader, I guess, at the time, and he trusted me to work the airstrikes. So we got spooky gunship up there, and I'm telling them, man, they're right on top of us. You need to work it right up to our strobes as close as you can. And I can't say enough good stuff about those gunners. They were so good. They could use those strobe lights, and they could literally walk their rounds right up to you. Hey, you didn't like to do that. They didn't like to do that, because there's always the chance of friendly fire, which happened periodically. When I got back home, I was visiting with one of my high school buddies who was in the Air Force. What'd you do? Oh, I was a gunner on a spooky gunship. And he said, sometimes we would fly in Laos. Oh, really? He said, yeah. And he starts describing this one mission. And he said, I would have sworn at that time, that was you talking on the radio, working the airstrikes or gunships. And the more we talked about the details of what went on, turned out this was one of my high school buddies, and I'm on the radio on the other end working his gunship. Yeah, it's just another funny story of who would believe this kind of stuff. Let's see. The last question went away. So
hang on. Let me get
I have short-term memory loss. They tell me at the VA that it's from too many explosions. So there we go. How often would the Hatchet Force train as a whole group? I got to be honest with you. Never. And what we would do was go out in platoons. And each platoon leader, we'd take our platoon down to the range and do immediate action drills, practice throwing grenades, you know, which with the yards, that was not a safe thing to be doing. The yards didn't know how to throw. And, you know, there were a few incidents. I'll leave it at that. So I never saw the company train as a group. It was always just platoons, individual platoons, or even just squads doing immediate action drills. But if we're all doing the same thing, you put us all together, we all know what to do. And when it happens, you react. And I never saw it go wrong, you know. So much for drill. But we trained and trained and trained. I didn't wear face paint. 99% of the time, I didn't wear a hat. A lot of us wore the cravat or the triangle shaped bandage. And we just made like a headband about it to soak up the sweat. If you're wearing a hat, it's not going to soak up the sweat. You're constantly wiping your forehead and all that, but the cravat would soak it up. Plus, think about this. You're on the trail. You're walking near the trail, and the Air Force decides to fly over and spray Agent Orange. At that time, all we knew about it was a defoliant. We didn't know it was going to kill us eventually. So, and back in those days, you didn't have the coordination because, number one, we weren't supposed to be over there in the first place. The Air Force, nobody told the Air Force we're over there. And so we're going along and we get sprayed with Agent Orange. That cravat, you take it off, pour some water out of your canteen, and all you knew was you could wipe it off of your skin as quick as you could. And that's the best you can do. I've already had my cancer. Thank you, Agent Orange. Somebody asked about injuries. I've had 40 major surgeries now. I'm getting ready for surgery number 41. They put a spinal cord stimulator in my back. It's been replaced 3 times. We're getting ready to have it taken out because it ain't doing any good. Trophies that I brought back from the bush. There's one I'm not going to talk about. Yeah, best left not talked about. Mm-hmm. I have some North Vietnamese equipment hanging on the wall out in my workshop. Mm-hmm. 5th group doesn't know it, but in September when I go down to the 5th group reunion, I'm going to donate it to the museum. I've got a North Vietnamese canteen. Yes. I've got which this will lead into another story. I've got a part of an AK pistol belt, ammo belt.
Wow.
Okay. How'd I get that ammo belt? Well, guys, guess what? We're sending the company in on a bomb damage assessment. Now, the numbers, I think, were way inflated, but they said there's going to be a flight of 52 B-52s hitting this regimental base camp area. Now, there's no way. I don't think there was even 52 B-52s in the whole arsenal of the Air Force's B-52s. But anyway, whatever it was, however the number, so they bombed this regimental base camp area that a recon team had found. Okay. When they put us in, we put the company in, all the dirt had not yet settled on the ground. We go in, there's hot rice still steaming on the tables. They got caught during breakfast. But let me tell you, anybody that thinks a B-52 that's dropping however many 2,000-pound bombs is going to kill all the bad guys has got another thing coming. These guys were experts at building bunkers and multi-layer tunnels and bunkers and whatever. So we get in there and we're finding these bunkers with steaming rice on the table and cook fires going and everything. Ooh. But if you've never seen a tree that's about 6 or 8 feet in diameter, blown to literally toothpicks, that's what it did. I mean, it cleared a area about the size of a big city. But an hour later, we were getting our asses kicked because we didn't kill anybody. We never found a single body. I found that canteen, and I found that ammo belt or ammo pouch, and that ammo belt was all scorched from the explosion. But we never found a single body. Every American on the teams, we carried the little, I think they're called ERC-10s, we called them, the little survival radios, because if something, God forbid, happened and you got separated or whatever, you had an emergency radio that you would contact air support. And there's a number of instances on recon teams where that radio was the only thing that saved a guy, because he was able to raise aircraft and they could get in and get him. In each platoon, there would be a PRC-25 that somebody carried in a rucksack on their back. And then we had the ERC-10s. And sometimes we had these other, and I don't know what the name of them is, but they were like these big black plastic phones, kind of. I don't know what they were called. And I only remember us using them once or twice. But so when we would move out, you've got a couple of PRC-25s. You got every American with an ERC-10. And we always moved in single file. Because if you bunch up and you get ambushed, I don't know the right way to say it. It's better to lose one or two guys than it is to lose 10 all at one, burst. So you'd go single file. Sometimes we would put guys out on the flanks, maybe 20 yards out on either side of us, and up about even with the point. So if there was an ambush waiting on us, they would hit the ambush first, and then we'd know what's going on. HT1 radio. I've never heard of an HT1 radio, so I don't know. Most significant mission that I was involved in. I guess the term significant, to me, the most significant one was when I got shot the first time when we hit that truck refueling station, because I saw firsthand Shell Oil Company drums, which thoroughly ticked me off. And of course, it was memorable because I got shot, but I've got a frame out in the workshop with the rest of the bullets out of that gun that I got shot with, which to some people might be kind of morbid, but how many people do you know had the gun and still has the bullets out of the gun you got shot with? So it's just a conversation piece, really. If you look at a lot of the pictures of us as we're moving through, and there was, you got to remember all these mountains straight up and straight down. Well, in between every one of them, there's usually a stream running down, coming down from the mountains. Like when it rains, especially, those could be gully washers, what we call here in the country. The leeches, oh my God. The leeches were just terrible. But what we found was real good for getting them off of you is we had these little squirt bottles of insect repellent. And I don't know what the hell was in that stuff, but you squirt that on a leech and he unhooks from you and falls off. That was the best thing. So a lot of us, I know there's pictures out there of some of the recon teams, apparently at Khartoum, where I was at, wearing leggings, like World War II or Korean War canvas leggings. Most of us, your Army socks were like almost knee-high wool socks or polyester and wool, whatever. And so you'd tuck your pants legs into the socks. So even if the leech tried to get on you, they're not actually on your skin. And then you could squirt them and, leech be gone. There's all kinds of questions. Leeches. I never heard of the beetles that ate webbing. What indige troops were the best? That's a hard one to say, because depending on which C&C you were at, kind of depended on what kind of troops you had. At Khartoum, at CCC, we had primarily Montagnards. I'm not going to say there weren't any Nungs or Cambodes, but primarily it was Montagnards, because we were right in the heart in the central highlands of Montagnard country. Up at Da Nang, out of CCN, they had a lot of Chinese Nungs, because the Nungs were descended, they had come from China through Laos or Thailand or whatever into the mountains of Vietnam. Down at CCS, I think they had a lot of Cambodes, because their area of operations was Cambodia. So it really depended on which camp you were at as to what the general makeup was of your troops. Again, I said it before and I'll say it again, that I love my yards. They had my back the whole time. And I had so many of the brass bracelets that they made as a sign of friendship. I had a whole armful of them. A few years ago, I sold a lot of my stuff to a collector. I'm kind of wishing a lot of it I wouldn't have parted with, but I'm 74 years old. It's time. Somebody's got to get that stuff. And sooner or later, when I'm gone, whatever's left, where's it going to go?
Exactly.
So again, I just think it really depends on where you were at as to what, and that's going to be your opinion of who did you prefer. The Yards hated the ethnic Vietnamese. The NVA were Vietnamese. The Yards hated the NVA. And the NVA would a lot of times go into the villages and snatch up a bunch of the Yards to be porters, carry equipment or whatever, so, but that's my take on it. I love my Yards. Okay, guys, let's have some questions here. Either that or I'm going to fall asleep. Oh, God, it's past my lunchtime. What tribe were your Yards from? It was a hodgepodge. We had Banar, Rade, Sadang. My girlfriend was Sadang. And there were other, almost every tribe was represented in the makeup of our Yards. And sometimes that caused communications problems because their dialects were all a little different. And that was hard for me. I felt like it was really important when you're out in the field to be able to understand their language, because if you're giving commands or they're trying to tell you something and you don't understand what they're saying, you got to find your interpreter, and that all eats up time. And generally, if something serious is going on, you don't have that kind of time. So, that's why I felt like it was important to learn some of the Montagnard dialects. Okay, best firefight story. Best firefight story. Well, I guess I'm kind of partial to my very first time in combat when we got ambushed, and I took that M79 and took care of the bad guys. That was pretty
good
cool.
One.
What was it like trying to maintain command and control over such a diverse group? I gotta say that was not a problem, period. Say you got a platoon out there. We had an interpreter with the platoon leader. I had my own interpreter, and every squad, or almost every squad, had an interpreter. we trained so much that everybody knew what was expected of them under different situations. So, like when we would train down on the range, I know I would try to set up scenarios, as many different scenarios as we could of ambushes and what have you. And we'd drill on each one of these different scenarios so that once we're out in the bush, no matter what the scenario, we've already trained for it and you could react. And of course, that wasn't perfect because there's always going to be exceptions to everything. Were there any conflicts? I wish I could figure out how to clean up my movies and put it online, but there's pictures in my album. If you look at the yard camp, you'll see a boxing match going on. So some of our different yard tribes and these guys would get into it with each other. Well, they thought that back in the States, it was like the Wild West because they watched too many Western movies that we'd show at night. And so they thought everybody carried a pistol on their hip. And if there's a conflict, they'd shoot it out. And we were having a problem there at the yard camp. And we did have a couple of shooting situations. So one of our guys, Frank Bellatier, I think he was from Illinois. I might be mistaken, but I think he was from Illinois. He had somebody back home send him a couple of pair of boxing gloves. So we decided, okay, these yards, if they get pissed off at each other, we'll let them box it out at evening formation. So all the pictures that are in my album were taken. I was up on the water tower so I could get on most of them so I could get a good view of it. We'd let them fight it out with boxing gloves. And that seemed to cool things down quite a bit. But, when you got different, like in this case, different tribes represented and they're all mingled together, it's invariable. You're going to have disputes or whatever. We let it be known very strenuously, in a situation, though, you might find yourself fired. And these yards are making more money in a month than an ARVN lieutenant. So, yeah, they didn't want to lose that money. So it did a pretty good job of keeping them under control. Sometimes there'd be fist fights or whatever, but the boxing thing turned out to be a really cool way of resolving a lot of these conflicts. Okay. In Plaster's book, he talks about being with a hatchet force and being nervous with the amount of noise. Well, that's true. If you've got a company of 105 or whatever men, good luck trying to be quiet. It just ain't going to happen. Being nervous because of the noise, personal opinion, but I think that's a little overstated because you got 100 and some men. You know, what are you worrying about? If we get hit, strength in numbers, when was the last time you heard about a recon team being overrun? And there are a couple of situations that occurred where a good part of the team got killed. But unlike a recon team where you only have maybe 8 or 9 guys, you get hit by a company, you got a good chance of dying. And so silence was critical. But whether it's a 32-man platoon or a 105-man company, the noise was not so much of an issue. Yeah, we tried to discourage it, but it wasn't as critical. I mean, we put tape on a lot of the metal parts on our harness and all that just to try to mute the noise. But Jason, you want to know what the night at the club was like? Generally, it was a bunch of drunks talking about the last mission. I mean, what do you all have in common is missions. So there'd be a lot of discussions, and a lot of it was not just blowing smoke and talking about what a professional killer you were, but a lot of it was talking about tactics. And there was a lot of stuff learned, and I've read other guys say the same thing. There was a lot of stuff that was learned sitting at the bar, getting drunk, but talking tactics and stuff. Anybody that wasn't a human sponge that wanted to soak up every little trick and tactic that they could was a fool, because the last thing you learned might be the thing that saves your ass the next time you're out there. And so sometimes you may not have been involved directly in a conversation that's going on, but you might have been sitting at the next table or down the bar, but still listening to what's going on, because you could pick up all kinds of stuff. So, that was a night at the bar. Every so often, and when I say every so often, I'm going to say every couple of months, there might be like a Filipino band come in and play. And usually when that happened, the female singer would, by the time at the end of the show, she's buck naked and everybody having a fit. And the officers are all trying to figure, okay, who's she going with tonight? And, I've got a few pictures, but I don't publish them. I learned some things. Was there any particular knife you like to carry? Some guys like to carry like a K-bar because it was a good heavy bladed knife that was good for chopping if you needed to or whatever. I don't consider the K-bar like a really good fighting knife. But then again, how many times are you in a knife fight out there? Almost never, I think would be an accurate number. I carried one of those smaller Air Force survival knives. And the reason I carried it, and I carried it on my left chest taped to my harness, the reason I carried it was the end of the handle was octagonal shaped, big solid piece of steel. So if you had to hit something, you've got this big heavy chunk of steel and you can use it for pounding. The blade, it was a fairly short blade, but you keep it razor sharp. And then on the backside of the blade was like saw teeth. The saw teeth was a good idea, but the blade was so thick that trying to saw something with it was not that easy. But that was my personal preference. Some guys carried what's known as the SOG knife. I always considered that more of a special use or collector's item more than anything else. The blade was a good fighting knife blade, but again, how often are you fighting hand to hand with a knife? Recon teams had their own in-house guide with all sorts of lessons learned. The Hatchet Force did not have the same thing. It was strictly learn as you go, remember what you learned, try to teach the new guys what you've learned. But there was never any kind of like a book of lesson learned. We knew about the recon teams had it, but the dynamics between the American personnel on a Hatchet Force mission, were egos running wild or were people cooperative? The best thing I can say to that is we were a team. Very, very rarely was there ever any kind of there were differences of opinion on what we should do on certain situations sometimes, but it was not like a thing that you would argue about it. Whoever was in command had the final say so. So you do what you're going to do. But overall, we lived together, we trained together, we were brothers. And in the field, it was just like a family back home. Plus, and this is something, lessons learned once you got out of the military, the importance of teamwork. Because if you didn't work together as a team, which is the answer to the next question, the most valuable lesson you learned, if you cannot work together as a team, you think you're a loner, you might as well be dead, because you're of no use to that team if you can't work together with them. And I know of a couple of instances of people who could not work as a team, and as soon as you got back from the field, within a matter of hours, they were gone. And I mean gone. So, to me, that's a valuable lesson that carried on through life. Mean what you say, your integrity means everything, and work together to get the job done. And that carried through into civilian life on a job. You work together to get whatever your job is, you work together to get it done. Yeah, your life may not be depending on it, but you still work together and get the job done. And there's people that don't know how to do that. Oh, yeah. Recon teams, you went in to try and support teams that were at risk of being overrun that required reinforcements. It happened all the time. We had on duty at all times what were called bright light teams. And a couple of times I was on bright lights where we had a whole platoon on standby. And you get a recon team that runs into some deep stuff and they're on the verge of being overrun, and they declare a prairie fire emergency, and they've got wounded, maybe even dead. And they maybe send in a platoon instead of another recon team. They'd send a platoon in to try to reinforce that recon team and get them on an LZ and get them out. And the priority would be to get the recon team, and whether they got dead, wounded, whatever, get them out. And then we'd worry about the platoon. And that's where the airstrikes and the gunships come in. There is nothing in this world like the sound of a Huey, especially a Huey that pops up over the ridge line in the jungle, because you don't hear them until they pop the top of the ridge, and then you hear that whoop, 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 and you know you're getting ready to go home. So yeah, bright light teams were a key part of what we did. They might be going in to look for a downed pilot, or they might be going in to save a recon team from being overrun. It just all varied. And you never knew, because there was nothing planned out. A gunship, a chopper, or a plane goes down. How long will we have to wait for air support? Yeah, it varied depending on the situation. I would say at the very longest, an hour. And that would only be because there were no teams in trouble. So there were no aircraft in the air at the time. And so the A1s, the choppers were at dock tow. They'd be refueled and ready to go at a minute's notice. So you'd have Cobras and you'd have Charlie model gunships, and then your slicks for troop carrying. The A1s, if there were none in the air at the moment, you had forward air controllers too. The A1s, we called them the SPADs. They had to come from Pleiku, so it may take them an hour to jump in their planes, be ready to go, and get to us. But I'd say at the very most an hour. A couple of times when it was so bad that we needed every aircraft that we could get to support. Like I said earlier, the fast movers like the I don't know, what were they, F-100s, F-105s, whatever. They're coming from Da Nang, so that might take them, 300 miles to get to us. But we didn't use them very often, except in extreme dire circumstances because of that. Because as soon as they got to us, they had to drop their stuff. Everybody had to get out of the way. They'd drop their stuff and then be gone, or they'd be out of fuel. So, major change in strategy. Well, I just finished reading a book, and to me, this directly addresses this question. It's called The Secret War Against Hanoi by Richard H. Schultz Jr. And this is a complete from inception to end of SOG. It's a big, long, almost 400-page paperback book. But it's not so much about like all the other SOG books about talking about specific missions. It's talking about all the Pentagon, the State Department, the ambassador to Laos, and all the crap that went on between these different organizations that affected what we were trying to do. And then to read that our own general, both Westmoreland and Abrams, neither one of them believed that what we were doing was worth a shit. They felt like, we were like a pinprick in the side of the NVA, that we really, that what we were doing was pretty much just a waste of resources. Some of the stuff I read really was eye-opening to me about all the restrictions that we never heard about, but they were there, and at the higher levels they heard about them. But us guys down at the bottom of the barrel, we never heard about a lot of all the political stuff and the nonsense that went on behind the scenes. The mainstream media, well, while I was over there is when old Jane Fonda took her famous picture of sitting on the North Vietnamese anti-aircraft gun. Disenchanted, that's pretty mild language to describe how we felt. We felt betrayed. We felt pissed off. We thought that some of these people or the media needed to have accidents. It is what it is. Because we're seeing ourselves busting our butts to get out there and do this job that we've been given to do. And then we're seeing all these restrictions put on us. And like the guys, for instance, perfect example is at CCC down at Pt2. All their missions were in Cambodia. Originally, they had to walk in across the border. They were not allowed to go in by choppers. They were not allowed to have any kind of air support whatsoever. So if they got in deep shit, they're in deep shit. And this was all political because people in the highest levels of the government didn't want it to be broadcast that we had American troops in Laos or Cambodia, and it's sometimes North Vietnam. Bud's going to be meeting with a close friend of mine that I was served with, named Vernon Ward, and I would recommend that whenever they get their recording set up, you listen to it. Vernon had the dubious distinction of taking a team into North Vietnam and capturing not one, not two, but 3 prisoners. Total badass story.
Absolutely. We've got one more question for you, and we're about at an hour and 45 minutes here, so we'll get one more question knocked out. It's a good one. It's about watches. A bunch of us are always interested in y'all's watches.
were you issued a Seco watch? The answer is no. I've heard guys say that they were. You want a Seco watch, you go to the PX and buy it.
Okay.
Now, and I do know, and I've seen pictures of them in one of the books or whatever. Apparently, there were some Seco watches that were issued. I never got one. So I wore a Seco watch. But I bought it at the PX, and it was nothing fancy, you know. Then you had the little bitty watch and compass on a nylon strap that you could wear. I had the compass. I didn't have the watch that went with it. You know, a lot of times you got this gear out of the supply room, and you got what they had, and some of it you just take what they had. The big thing on watches was you go to the great PX in the sky over in Japan while you're on R&R, and you buy a Rolex. Yeah. So at that time, a Rolex might be a few $100. And now they're thousands and thousands of dollars. And there's a few of the guys that I see post from time to time that still have theirs. One guy posted recently that he sent his to be cleaned and whatever, and it cost him $1,000 just to be cleaned and reconditioned or whatever. So the Special Forces requisite was, or at least in SOG, was a Blue Star sapphire ring, a Rolex, and those were the big
knife,
things.
usually.
Well, the SOG knife, yeah. I had 2 Blue Star sapphire rings. One wasn't good enough, so I had one in silver and one in gold. Alan Farrell, who we talked about earlier, his family, somebody in his family was a jeweler. So Alan went to R&R in Bangkok, and he came back and he showed me this little leather pouch full of jewels, diamonds, sapphires, rubies, and all that, which he sent home to his relative who was a jeweler. But, he bought it for next to nothing. The other thing that you got to have if you're in SOG was the war medallion.
Oh, yes, sir.
So I know, and different guys, they were getting them. There's one jewelry shop in Bangkok in particular, and there was a lot of different versions of it. The one I had, was 22 karat gold, and it was about that big around. It wasn't huge, but it was, and it had an 18 karat gold chain with it.
Wow.
$25.
Wow.
I turned down, before it got stolen, when my house got burglarized, I turned down $2,000 from a jeweler for it.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love seeing those photos of y'all wearing your medallions.
Yeah. There's pictures in the album of me on the plane coming home after my first year wearing my medallion, and I got my shirt open because I was drunk. We stopped in Honolulu, and the tourists were buying us so many drinks that they had to hold the plane for me. And the stewardesses were screwing with me. So I'm sitting there with my shirt open with my war medallion, and I got stewardesses standing behind me smiling.
I've got some of your album that I'll be sharing for folks of some of the photos that you've mentioned today. I'll be sharing so folks can get a good look at you.
Be sure and share some of the ones from Leghorn. There seems to be a lot of interest in Leghorn. And look at the terrain, and you'll see how high up Leghorn was. And, there's nothing even coming close to it. So it's pretty cool.
It is.
So what are you doing? Cutting me off now?
Oh, no.
Because I could talk for another couple hours. I mean,
if
it's just whatever people.
The bad thing is I'm on the phone, so the moment my phone starts going dead, it's gonna start cutting me off. Would you
You know,
mind? I
Bud,
mean, if you don't have
they make
anything,
these things called chargers.
I do, and I literally came in here with 100% charge. Would you like to do another one? I mean, folks have got
I'll do
Q and
whatever you
A's.
want to do. There's a comment right now. He joined late, and more Hatchet Force info is desperately needed. And obviously, I have no problem talking.
Well, then, how
And
about we set up another one for tomorrow morning then?
yeah, that'll work.
Okay. I hate
Pick,
guys, I hate to be the party pooper, but I don't want it to go dead and we lose this whole recording before it goes on YouTube. So we've gone almost 2 hours now. So how about we put a pin in it and we pick up here tomorrow for a Q&A session for tomorrow for part 3.
that works for me.
Okay, and the guys are saying right now they're gonna yeah, all of y'all get y'all's questions ready because tomorrow's gonna be a strict Q&A. So Mr.
And
Terry,
somebody made a comment. Somebody made a comment that I'm a legend or something.
oh
I
yeah,
may be a legend in my own mind, but keep in mind that the stories that I'm telling, every one of us that did that stuff can tell stories that are just as hairy or maybe not as hairy, but we've all got the stories. So it's not like I was a Rambo or anything. It's just we've
well
all got the stories.
you're highly looked upon from this generation and many more. And like you see,
Well,
guys are already starting to get ready to look forward tomorrow and getting questions ready.
yep.
So I think tomorrow is going to be a
Okay.
good morning of questions. So
What time you want to do it?
um if is 10 o'clock my time good for you again?
Are you on Central Time?
Yes, sir.
So am I. So 10
Okay.
o'clock's fine,
Okay. Well, guys, get
just like
ready.
we
I'll
did
go
this
ahead and
morning.
set up a event for tomorrow, and we'll have a Q&A session with Mr. Terry tomorrow at 10 a.m. Then,
Got
um,
it.
Mr. Terry,
Okay.
I'm about to end the video, and I'll touch base with you here in a bit when I charge the phone and eat lunch.
Thanks, everybody, for listening in.
Absolutely, guys. Thank y'all. Everybody's
Okay.
saying thank you, and y'all get y'all stuff ready for tomorrow, and we'll have a good Q&A tomorrow. So y'all have a good day, and we'll see y'all in the morning. See ya.
Take care.